You are entering an ancient Egyptian palace. The high walls are covered with statues of gods. The light from the torches burning with aromatic oils reflects off the glittering gold and silver. In the middle of the vast room is a long table covered with a pure white linen cloth on which are laid countless dishes. There are fragrant loaves of barley bread, sparkling red wine in golden bowls, golden roasted duck, and plump bunches of grapes. This is not just a feast, but a sacred ritual. For the Egyptians, the palace table was not just to satisfy hunger, but to nourish the soul. Each dish offered to the pharaoh, who was considered the son of Ra, had spiritual significance. However, you will soon notice something strange. Not every dish appeared on the royal table. Some were completely eliminated. Even just mentioning them makes people shudder. Why is that? Why are some types of fish, some types of meat, even small spices like onions and garlic, considered unclean to the point of being able to taint the soul of the pharaoh? That question opens up an interesting journey where we will learn not only about ancient Egypt, but also see that throughout human history, many other civilizations also have their own black lists in their cuisine. Part 1. The World of Egyptian Royal Cuisine. Ancient Egyptian society had a profound reverence for life and death. While most people consider dining as a daily necessity, the Egyptians saw it as a way to connect with the gods and the realm of the afterlife. This is evident in the preparation and consumption of food, particularly among the nobility and royalty. But how do we know this? Well, one reason is the discovery of intact meals within royal tombs. Archaeologists uncovered examples in the tomb of Tutankhamun. That young pharaoh, whose tomb was discovered intact by Howard Carter in 1922, team found earthenware jars filled with honey, baskets of dates, and even sealed red wine bottles. Wine was a rare luxury import from Canaan or the Levant, reserved for special occasions. The fact that wine was placed in the tomb suggests the Egyptians believed the pharaoh needed delicate flavors to accompany him on his journey to the afterlife. Another example of food being part of an afterlife ritual was the discovery of loaves of bread baked with flax seeds in the tomb of Queen Edifers II, the second wife of Pharaoh Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid. The presence of bread symbolizes nourishment for the queen's journey. In fact, the ancient Egyptians took food so seriously that they even created a god of fertility named Osiris, who taught mankind agriculture and helped humans flourish through farming. So let's talk about what the royal menu looked like. Ancient Egyptian cuisine was primarily based on locally sourced ingredients, reflecting the bounty of the Nile River and its surrounding lands. You may be surprised to learn that the staple grain was barley, not wheat. Barley was used to make bread, porridge, and beer, which was enjoyed daily by all social classes. The Egyptians also consumed einkorn wheat, another type of grain, which was preferred by the wealthy. The royal court was served on golden plates, while commoners ate from simple clay bowls. Fruits like figs, grapes, and dates, which grew along the riverbanks, were staples of the royal diet. They added sweetness and were preserved for year-round enjoyment. In addition to fruit, the ancient Egyptians kept orchards full of delicacies like pomegranates, which they believed could restore youth. Fish played a significant role in the Egyptian diet. Catfish, perch, and tilapia were commonly caught in the Nile and were often served as a protein source. While fish was available to all Egyptians, the pharaohs likely enjoyed a more varied selection of freshwater fish and seafood imported from distant lands. The abundance of fish in their diet is reflected in ancient artwork, which frequently depicts pharaohs holding fish or surrounded by aquatic motifs. Meat was another essential component of Egyptian cuisine. Although ancient Egyptian artwork primarily features vegetarian meals, this doesn't imply that meat was uncommon. On major occasions, beef, goose, and duck were offered to the pharaoh, grilled to a golden hue and seasoned with cumin, coriander, and honey. Hunting ducks and geese was a popular pastime among the wealthy, who enjoyed shooting them in specially constructed boats. In fact, ancient Egyptian artwork depicts the royal family participating in hunting expeditions. For instance, a painting from the tomb of Queen Nefertiti showcases her and her ladies-in-waiting shooting birds from a boat. Meat was also served in the afterlife. As mentioned earlier, the tomb of Tutankhamun contained jars of preserved beef, showcasing the importance of meat in both earthly and eternal meals. But the Egyptian diet wasn't just about sustenance. It was also a reflection of their beliefs and values. For example, the avoidance of certain foods was not merely a matter of taste or preference. It was deeply rooted in their religious convictions. Even though the ancient Egyptians were not strictly vegetarian, there were some animals they didn't eat. Their taboos extended to certain animals that were held sacred, such as cats, dogs, and the sacred bull Apis, which was worshipped and mummified separately. Killing these animals was considered a crime against the gods. Additionally, the ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile catfish, known as the Kest in hieroglyphics, harbored a curse due to its association with the god Set, who murdered Osiris, the god of the underworld. This belief stemmed from an ancient myth where Set chopped Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Some parts ended up in the Nile, and fish, including catfish, ate parts of Osiris. From then on, Egyptians viewed catfish as unclean and eating them was forbidden. Interestingly, some regions took this taboo to such an extreme that they prohibited fishing or even the sale of catfish, showing just how deeply ingrained their beliefs were in everyday life. Pork was another meat Egyptians refrained from consuming due to its connection to Set, the god of chaos, darkness, and storms. The ancient Egyptians associated Set with evil and believed that eating pork would contaminate the soul, making it unfit for entering the afterlife. Priests, who played a crucial role in rituals connecting the living and the dead, strictly avoided pork for this reason. Onions and garlic were also foods Egyptians generally avoided. In some cases, it was believed that their pungent smell could drive away the gods, and in others, they were thought to be too vulgar for important ceremonies. However, this didn't mean they were completely banned. Soldiers were allowed to use onions and garlic to increase their strength, as seen in artwork depicting them wearing garlands of garlic. Depictions of these foods in ancient Egyptian art are relatively rare, suggesting that they were indeed considered too common for important occasions. The Egyptians' respect for animals extended to their meals. They valued the role animals played in society and religion, and this influenced their dietary choices. For example, while chicken was widely consumed, it was usually served without its head to symbolize the bird's reluctance to be killed. They also refrained from serving a whole fish, believing it reminded people of sacred animals that should not be harmed. Instead, they would serve fish fillets or remove the fish's head to prevent any resemblance to the sacred creatures. This treatment of animals in their meals reflects the Egyptians' deep connection to the natural world and their belief in treating all living things with respect. It might seem strange to us today, but to the ancient Egyptians, food wasn't just about nourishment. It was a way to honor the gods and maintain balance in the world. These ancient food taboos offer a fascinating glimpse into the complex beliefs and practices of a long-lost civilization. And now we'd like to hear from you. What other aspects of ancient Egyptian life would you like us to cover next? Part 2. Religious and spiritual meaning. Why were some foods absolutely forbidden in ancient Egyptian palaces? In Part 1, we talked about the tastes, varieties of food that the ancient Egyptian kings enjoyed. Now, in this episode, let's move to the question: what did the pharaohs absolutely avoid eating? What kind of food could appear on the table of the mighty king of Egypt? When we think of food, we often think of fullness, taste, and sensory pleasure. But for the ancient Egyptians, food had another meaning. It was something that passed through the body, mixed with blood, transformed into spirit, and from there directly affected the relationship between humans and the gods. In the inscriptions on the temple walls, we see images of pharaohs offering cakes, wine, and beef to the god Osiris. But what few people pay attention to is, there were foods that never appeared in this ritual. Not because they were scarce, but because they were considered unclean, capable of polluting the soul. So, why was there this strange division? No, 1. The case of the Nile catfish, the Osiris eater. In the Osiris myth, when the god of life and death was killed and dismembered by Seth, part of his body fell into the Nile. Legend has it that a fish, often thought to be a catfish, Nile catfish, swallowed a piece of the sacred body. From then on, this fish was cursed, becoming a symbol of impurity. For the pharaoh, eating catfish was like swallowing the divine taint, causing the soul to lose the purity necessary to reunite with Osiris in the realm of life after death. Interestingly, archaeological documents in the Abydos region, the center of Osiris worship, show that people here completely abstained from catfish. Meanwhile, in other parts of Egypt, ordinary people still ate this type of fish. This distinction further emphasizes the boundary between the people and the royal family. What the pharaoh avoided, the people could freely eat. A quick comparison. In ancient India, cows were considered sacred because they were associated with the god Krishna, and Indians abstained from eating beef to maintain purity. In contrast, the Egyptians did not ban an entire animal, but only those with a history of sin in mythology. Number 2, pork and the god Seth, the embodiment of chaos. If catfish were associated with Osiris, pigs were associated with Seth, the god of the desert, chaos, and storms. The Egyptians believed that Seth was the one who killed Osiris. His image often bore the head of a strange animal, a hybrid of a wild boar, a donkey, and a wild dog. Therefore, pork was considered tainted with Seth's aura, something that could pollute the soul. Ancient Egyptian medical texts even suggested that eating too much pork would cause skin diseases, as a punishment from Seth. Priests serving in temples absolutely avoided pork. Herodotus, a 5th century BC Greek historian, once wrote, "The Egyptians considered pigs to be unclean animals. If a person accidentally touched a pig, he had to immediately jump into the Nile to purify himself." Comparison. In Judaism and Islam, pigs were also considered unclean and are still forbidden to eat. This suggests a deep cultural connection. The Middle East and North Africa may have shared beliefs about the spiritual filthiness associated with pigs. 3. Onions and garlic, spices for the common people, but not for the pharaohs. One thing that surprised many people was that onions and garlic, ingredients so common that pyramid builders were paid in onions and garlic, were never found in the palace. Why? The Egyptians believed that the pungent smell of garlic and onions was offensive to the gods. In the medical text Eber's Papyrus, garlic and onions were recorded as medicine of soldiers, which helped increase endurance, but were considered too profane to appear in religious rituals. This reflects an important philosophy. Pharaohs were not mortal. While commoners, farmers, and soldiers ate garlic and onions to stay healthy, pharaohs, who were half divine, had to maintain their purity with elegant foods that did not have the pungent smell of the world. Comparison. In Hinduism, Brahmin monks abstained from onions and garlic because they believed they stimulated lust and disturbed the soul. In Buddhism, the 5 pungent onions, garlic, chives, shallots, and fennel, were also abstained in temples because their smell disturbed the mind. So this shows a strange similarity. Many ancient cultures associated onions, garlic, with the profane, lust, and uncleanness of the soul. Number 4. Sacred animals, absolutely not to be eaten. A characteristic of Egyptian religion was the worship of animals. Cats were associated with the goddess Bastet. Crocodiles were associated with the god Sobek. Apis bulls were considered the incarnation of the god Peta. In temples, these animals were cared for as gods, mummified after death. And of course, killing or eating them was considered a terrible crime. This makes it even clearer. The pharaoh's table was not only to nourish the body, but also to protect the soul from blasphemy. Compare. In ancient Greece, people did not eat goat meat during the sacrifices to the god Pan, because the goat was his sacred animal. In modern India, cows are also not allowed to be slaughtered because of their association with the gods. Again, we see a common denominator. Eating is not just an act of survival, but also a spiritual decision. Once again, we see a common denominator. Eating is not just an act of survival, but also a spiritual decision related to the survival of the soul. 5. The fundamental idea. Purity, the condition for living after death. All of these taboos go back to a core belief of the Egyptians. A person is only truly alive when the soul, Ba-Ka, remains pure. If the soul is impure, it will not be able to pass the judgment rituals of Osiris in the Hall of Truth, Hall of Ma'at. So everything that enters the body of the pharaoh, from the air he breathes, the water he drinks, to a piece of meat, a sip of wine, must be clean, correct, and in accordance with the purity required by religion. Today, many people laugh when they hear about not eating onions, garlic, or not touching pigs, thinking that it is superstition. But if we look deeper, we see food is a way for people to establish their identity, boundaries, and connection with the sacred world. In the ancient Egyptian palace, the list of taboos was part of the ritual, a reminder that the pharaoh was no ordinary person. And it was through these strict rules that the image of the pharaoh was reinforced as a bridge between the gods and the human world, both in life and in death. In the era of ancient Egypt, food not only nourished the body, but also played a significant role in the spiritual life of the nation. The pharaohs, as the embodiment of divinity on earth, followed strict dietary rules that separated them from the common people. They strictly avoided catfish, pork, onions, garlic, and most notably, all sacred animals. These prohibitions were deeply rooted in religious beliefs, where every aspect of life, including diet, was intertwined with the worship of gods and the afterlife. The consumption of certain foods was believed to have the power to either purify or corrupt the soul, and the pharaohs, with their elevated status, were expected to maintain the utmost purity to ensure their successful journey into the afterlife. It's fascinating to explore how deeply ingrained these beliefs were in their culture. To think that something as simple as a bite of garlic could disturb the balance of their soul is both intriguing and a testament to the power of their faith. The Egyptians didn't just eat to satisfy hunger. They ate to nurture the soul and ensure its well-being for eternity. Their dietary restrictions were a tangible representation of this goal. Part 3. Religious and spiritual significance in Egyptian royal cuisine. You know, unlike us today, where food is mainly for energy and pleasure, for the ancient Egyptians, eating was connected with the whole cosmology, full of myths and taboos. So let's find out how their belief made each meal a kind of ritual. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button so you won't miss any episodes. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now to join the Egyptology family. Let's start. 1. Food and immortality. The ancient Egyptians weren't just interested in surviving in this life, but in the next life too. They believed that the soul would continue to exist even after the body died. And guess what? Their view of food was a big part of this belief. You see, they thought that everything we eat doesn't just stay in our bodies, but becomes part of our souls, our ka. So what we eat affects not only our lives, but also our journey to the afterlife. Now let's talk about the ka. In Egyptian beliefs, the ka was like the soul's best friend, its partner in crime. It was this part of us that kept going, even when the body kicked the bucket. But here's the thing, the ka needs good food to stay happy and strong. Imagine the ka as a little picky eater. It only wants the best, the most pure food to stay happy. If it's not satisfied, it can get all grumpy and make our journey to the afterlife really tough. In the Book of the Dead, we hear the dead person begging to be given the best food and drink, asking for help to pass the test of immortality. When someone says, "Give me the bread of heaven and the beer of earth, that my soul may never thirst," they're not just asking for some fancy space food and cosmic brew. No, my friends, they're asking for the purest, most divine food to nourish their soul. This idea was especially important for the pharaohs. You see, they were considered the son of Ra, the sun god, so they needed to eat very carefully. Every bite had to be perfect to keep their soul happy and pure. But wait, there's more. Eating the wrong food could bring bad vibes into the funeral ceremony. Can you imagine how stressful that was for the cooks in the royal kitchen? They had to make sure every dish was top-notch, not just for the pharaoh's taste buds, but for their soul's journey, too. This makes every meal in the royal palace a kind of ritual, a connection between the earthly life of the pharaoh and their journey to the afterlife. It's like a cosmic balancing act to keep everything in harmony. 2. Connection with mythology. The ancient Egyptians loved their myths and legends, so much that they wove them into every aspect of their lives, including their food. Let me tell you a story about Osiris and Seth. Osiris was the god of the underworld and the dead, and Seth, well, he was his brother and murderer. One day, Seth got a coffin that looked exactly like his brother's, and did a very bad thing. He put Osiris's body inside and threw it into the river. Poor Osiris floated down the river until he reached the sea and became one with the water. But here's the catch. Some parts of his body ended up in different places, and one part, you guessed it, inside a catfish. The Egyptians believed that the catfish swallowed part of Osiris, making it a traitor. So you can imagine how surprised they were when they caught catfish in their nets. They were like, "Oh my gosh, we just caught a piece of a god." So what did they do? They took the catfish, broke its backbone, and threw it back into the river. That way, they believed they were setting Osiris's spirit free. After this incident, catfish disappeared from the menus of the Egyptians. They stopped eating it altogether. Only the poor folks who didn't know the legend still ate it. But for the rich and powerful, fish was a big no-no. But don't worry, there were plenty of other fish in the sea. The Egyptians didn't just avoid catfish, they steered clear of any fish with fins or scales. That meant no more carp, garfish, lungfish, or catfish. They went out of their way to avoid these fish. Can you believe it? And guess what? There was another animal that was off limits for the Egyptians, pigs. They thought that pigs were related to Seth, the god of chaos, so they couldn't eat them. EW. But it gets even weirder. The Egyptians believed that if they accidentally touched a pig, they had to wash themselves in the Nile to get rid of the bad luck. Yikes. Pigs were considered dirty and sinful, and the Egyptians wanted to stay as pure as possible. After all, they didn't want to be punished by the gods. Not only fish and pork, but also onions and garlic. These were also forbidden foods for the Egyptians. They believed that the smell of onions and garlic was so strong that it could drive away the gods. And you know what? They weren't totally wrong. Have you ever tried to talk to someone who ate hard-boiled eggs and garlic for breakfast? I have, and it wasn't pleasant. The Egyptians were smart enough to know that strong smells could ruin a party, especially when the party was with the gods. So to honor the gods and keep the party going, they left onions and garlic out of their meals. 3. Taboos as a tool of governance. Now let us talk about why the Egyptians had so many rules about what they could and couldn't eat. Was it just because they were afraid of the gods? Or was there something else going on? Well, it turns out that food taboos were also a way for the rulers to keep control and show off their power. You see, the Egyptians had a strict social hierarchy, and the pharaohs were at the top of the pyramid. They were considered divine rulers, and everyone else was below them. Now, I'm not saying that the Egyptians were a bunch of sycophants, but they definitely wanted to keep the pharaoh happy. And what better way to do that than to follow his lead when it came to food? When the pharaoh said no pork, everyone said no pork. When he said no onions, everyone followed suit. It wasn't just a matter of taste or religion. It was a way to show respect and obedience to the ruler. The pharaoh was the embodiment of the gods on earth, and his every move was watched and copied by his subjects. If he abstained from certain foods, so did they. And it wasn't just about following the pharaoh's lead. It was also about keeping the lower classes under control. By forbidding certain foods, the pharaohs created a clear boundary between themselves and their subjects. They were the ones who could eat like gods, while the common folk had to stick to their humble meals. But the taboos weren't just about keeping the masses in line. They were also a way to remind everyone of the pharaoh's divine right to rule. By avoiding certain animals and ingredients, the Egyptians were constantly reminded of the gods and their power. It was a subtle but effective way to keep the pharaoh in the good graces of the gods and maintain social order. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to appreciate the Egyptians and their fascinating food customs. Who knows? Maybe you'll learn something new, or even change the way you look at your plate. Just remember, don't eat that catfish and say no to onions before you talk to the gods. Was it only Egypt that chose some foods to eat and others not to eat? The answer is no. Because if we follow the course of the Nile River to the east and arrive at the banks of the Yellow River in China, or if we sail south from Alexandria to India, we will find a surprising fact. Wherever there are religious beliefs and a powerful king, there will be dietary taboos. Now, let us take a journey through time and space and see how civilizations beyond Egypt choose their food. In the ancient city of Xi'an, archaeologists excavated a large tomb. The brick wall was covered with a huge amount of gold foil, layer upon layer, glittering brilliantly. Inside was the tomb of the first emperor of China, Emperor Qin Shi Huang. According to legend, he was the child of heaven chosen by the heavens to unify China. His task was to maintain the mandate of heaven. It was his duty to ensure that the people lived and reproduced, the crops grew, and the country prospered. To accomplish this important mission, he had to live a pure life and maintain harmony with the heavens. What did that mean? At least he had to pay attention to what he ate. Today, if we want to know what the first emperor of China ate, we can refer to the mausoleum of the first emperor of China. This is an ancient book called The Rites of Chow. It records the etiquette and system of the Chow and Han dynasties. It has been passed down to this day and has become a precious material for us to understand the customs of ancient China. It tells us that Emperor Qin Shi Huang enjoyed a variety of delicacies. Venison, beef, lamb, chicken, duck, fish, and shrimp were all served before him. Fruits such as peaches and plums were also plentiful. However, there was one kind of food that was never served on the emperor's table: food with a strong fishy smell. That means that even if the best chefs in the world cook a big fish, even if it is braised, stewed, or steamed, it still cannot be served to the emperor. You might ask, why? Why did the emperors of China have this taboo against fish? We don't know exactly why. Maybe it's because fish is too common. After all, the Yellow River and the East China Sea are nearby. The common people eat a lot of it. If the emperor eats it all the time, it's not special anymore. Or maybe it's because fish meat is too tender and falls apart easily, unlike mammals. Once cooked, it can't be shaped, which is not majestic enough. In any case, this rule continued until the Song dynasty. For more than 1,000 years, Chinese emperors could not enjoy the taste of fish. It was not until Emperor Song Renzong that this rule was broken. One day, the chef made a mistake. He put a few pieces of fish into the emperor's bowl, and Emperor Song Renzong actually ate it without hesitation. Since then, the emperor's menu was no longer limited, and the Chinese dynasty lasted for another 800 years. In addition to the types of food, ancient Chinese emperors also had strict requirements on the way the food was prepared. Just like the Egyptians, they didn't allow certain vegetables to appear in front of the emperor. Which vegetables do you think they are? Onions and garlic. The ancients believed that eating onions and garlic would cause bad breath, which would dirty the air in the palace. If you've ever been to China, you must have noticed that many restaurants offer tea or a small piece of candy after a meal. That is because Chinese people pay attention to the smell of the breath, and they want to make sure their guests have fresh breath. It's hard to imagine that 2,000 years ago, ancient Chinese emperors had the same concerns. Archaeologists found a large number of food remains in the tombs of ancient Chinese nobles. From the remains, we learned that they liked to eat wild game, mutton, pork, and poultry. But strangely, we can't find any trace of dog meat. But we know from history books that dog meat was very popular among the Chinese people at that time. The reason is simple. Dog meat tastes like pork, and it can be stored for a long time. It's the perfect food for the long winter. So why did the Han Dynasty nobles not eat dog meat, which was so popular among the people? We don't know. Perhaps this is also an ancient taboo similar to Egypt. Across the Ganges River from India, there is a similar taboo. You already know that the ancient Egyptians believed that certain foods could bring bad luck, so they chose not to eat those foods. For example, they didn't eat fish. In Egypt, fish was considered the food of the poor, and it was even said that fish could eat Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Therefore, the Egyptians would not eat fish. Similarly, the ancient Indians also believed that certain foods would bring bad luck. They believed that food could affect a person's karma, and thus whether a person could eat or not depended on his or her karma. For example, they believed that eating beef was unlucky because cows were sacred animals in India, and eating them would bring misfortune. In addition, eating onions and garlic was also considered unlucky because onions and garlic could stimulate people's desires, which was not conducive to meditation. In ancient India, there was a very special group of people, the Brahmins. They were the highest caste and acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Brahmins believed that everything in the world was created by Brahman, and they believed that the purpose of human life was to seek liberation. Brahmins believed that eating meat would harm their karma, so they were almost all vegetarians. They only ate grains, fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. And just like the Egyptians, the Indians also believed that eating some foods could harm the soul. For example, they believed that eating eggs would pollute the soul. At the same time, they also believed that eating seafood was unlucky because seafood lived in water, which was a place where impurities gathered, so they would not eat them. Interestingly, the Egyptians and Indians had the same taboo against onions. This shows that in different corners of the world, people have the same understanding of onions. Maybe it's not just the smell, but also the meaning behind the smell that makes onions a taboo. Maybe you're surprised to hear that the ancient Greeks and Romans also had taboos against certain foods. Unlike the Egyptians, Chinese, and Indians, the Greeks and Romans did not see food as an obstacle to communication with the gods, but as a bridge to communication with the gods. The ancient Greeks and Romans believed that sacrificing certain animals to the gods was an important way to communicate with the gods. In ancient Greek mythology, Zeus was the supreme leader of all the gods. To honor him, the ancient Greeks would sacrifice bulls, rams, and pigs to him. But oddly enough, the ancient Greeks would never sacrifice fish to Zeus. In ancient Greek society, fish was considered food for poor people, so it was never worthy of being sacrificed to the supreme god. Ancient Rome was a land of religion. The Romans believed that sacrificing certain foods to certain gods would bring them good luck. For example, in ancient Rome, the god of agriculture was very important. In order to pray for a good harvest, farmers would sacrifice bread and wine to the god of agriculture. But there was one kind of food that the ancient Romans never sacrificed: fava beans. The Romans believed that the souls of the dead lived in fava beans, and sacrificing them to the gods would be disrespectful to the dead. This taboo was deeply rooted in the hearts of the Roman people. Even during World War II, when food was scarce, the British did not distribute fava beans to the people because they did not want to violate the Roman taboos. We are now in the 21st century, a time when science and technology are highly developed. But even today, there are still many people who have taboos against certain foods. For example, there are many people in the West who refuse to eat pork because they believe that pork is an unclean animal. In China, there are also people who refuse to eat certain foods, such as snakes and rats. This is because these foods are not only unpalatable, but also carry diseases that can be harmful to humans. All in all, people's taboos against certain foods are often closely related to culture, religion, and health. We may not be able to understand why the ancients had taboos against certain foods, but we can appreciate the wisdom they left us. After all, they are also our ancestors. Their thoughts and practices are part of our cultural heritage. Let's go back to the era of the Egyptian pharaohs. Imagine you're wandering through a bustling marketplace, the air thick with the scent of spices and fresh produce. But amidst the vibrant scene, there's a strange sight: fishmongers displaying their catch, but no customers. As you inquire, you learn that these stalls are deserted because fish is forbidden. Not just for this market, but for the entire kingdom. For over 3 millennia, from the 3rd dynasty to the decline of the New Kingdom, eating fish was considered a sin. Eating the flesh of sacred animals was simply unacceptable. So much so that even the pharaohs, the epitome of power and luxury, abstained from this delicacy. They feared that the fish, associated with the god Osiris, would bring contamination to their bodies and souls. But why did the Egyptians hold such strong beliefs? How did a simple culinary choice become a symbol of spirituality? To answer, we must delve deep into ancient myths. The death of Osiris is a central myth in Egyptian religion, and the story is filled with symbolism. After his murder, Osiris's body floated downstream on a boat made of metal, perhaps symbolizing the journey of the soul after death. The boat landed in the marshes of the delta, where he was resurrected, producing the first plant, the papyrus. Some scholars believe that the fish in Egyptian mythology may represent the Greeks' mythical sirens, creatures who lured sailors to their deaths. By avoiding fish, the Egyptians distanced themselves from the realm of the dead and maintained their connection to the living. Moreover, fish are cold-blooded, a characteristic that the Egyptians, with their reverence for life, might have viewed as spiritually deficient. But the Egyptian taboo didn't exist in isolation. Across the vast canvas of human history, countless cultures have harbored similar culinary aversions. Religious scholars have noticed a fascinating phenomenon. The Egyptian taboo did not vanish with the collapse of the dynasty. Instead, it was incorporated into new religions, migrating to Judaism, Christianity, and eventually Islam. In Judaism, the concept of kosher, meaning purity, echoes ancient Egyptian beliefs. Certain fish, like eels, lacking scales, are deemed unclean. The prohibition of eating meat and milk together also finds parallels in the avoidance of mixing different food categories, reflecting a desire to maintain purity. In Islam, the concept of haram holds significance. Pork, blood, and animals that have died without sacrifice are forbidden, carrying spiritual taint reminiscent of the Egyptians' belief in the spiritual impurity of certain animals. And so the pharaohs' banquets echo through time, shaping dietary practices for millennia. While social classes have evolved, food remains a silent herald of societal standing. In medieval Christianity, many monasteries practiced abstinence, especially during Lent, viewing food as a means to cleanse the soul. This mirrors the Egyptian concept of achieving a pure state through diet. Thus, across cultures and eras, the pursuit of purity through food choices persists. Today, we may scoff at ancient beliefs, yet culinary taboos continue to permeate our lives. Caviar and fine wines grace grand feasts, while garlic and onions are relegated to humble kitchens. This echoes the Egyptian ethos, where the consumption of certain foods was associated with the divine. Ancient Egypt thus emerges not as a bizarre relic of the past, but as a cultural ancestor, its influence woven into the fabric of our contemporary world. But let's turn our attention to an enigma that continues to puzzle researchers. Among the myriad of taboos, some remain shrouded in mystery. Excavations at Abydos and Saqqara have uncovered ceramic jars containing remnants of meals, including cereal grains and poultry bones. But some jars hold unidentified food remains, raising questions about long-forgotten culinary prohibitions. A small stone tablet from the New Kingdom era poses another riddle. It reads, "Let not the food of Seth enter the altar of Osiris." What constituted the food of Seth remains a matter of debate, leaving us to ponder whether more forgotten dietary restrictions lie dormant in the annals of time, waiting to be unearthed. As our journey draws to a close, we are left with profound questions. Could more culinary taboos lie buried in the sands of time? What other aspects of ancient Egyptian culture do we need to re-examine through the lens of food? Perhaps the story of the Egyptian pharaohs serves as a reminder that our relationship with food is deeply entwined with our spiritual beliefs and cultural norms. What may seem like a simple meal is often a reflection of a society's values, fears, and aspirations. Just as the Egyptians sought to elevate their souls through their culinary choices, so too do many cultures throughout history, and even today. From the most opulent banquet to the simplest home-cooked meal, our plates tell stories that echo through time. In understanding these stories, we gain a deeper appreciation for the rich tapestry of human culture and the enduring legacy of ancient Egypt. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to hit the like button below to stay updated with all our historical tales. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and above all, keep seeking answers. Together, we can uncover endless wonders that history has in store for us.